the District 2 trustees for the school board. Andy Patceg's gonna go first tonight. Andrew Patceg is gonna go first tonight. And then once he's done, Clint Beaver will be here, so we'll meet with both of them. Same form that we've always had. He'll get to introduce himself, give an overview of him and why he's wanting this position, and then we can all ask him questions. Everybody stay respectful and kind.
Bring it on.
Get him. Let's get him.
Yeah.
I've been brainstorming how I could pick on him, make him sweat a little bit. But anyway, so we'll do that, and then when Andy's done, we'll have probably at this point, we might have about 10 minutes, 15 minutes between Andy and getting started with Clint. And then just a side note, y'all know that we have our new little guy home, so maybe we'll stay till 8, but I'll bet we'll have to cut out at 7:30. I'll let Clint know that so he knows I'm not just disinterested, but we want to stay as long as we can, but we have things we've got to do for him to function well. So with that, here's Andy. Thanks, Andy.
All right. Well, get my copy close to me here. I suppose I'll just hold this. So I'm really happy to be presenting here tonight, and I'm really grateful that all of you could attend. I've been involved in a lot of these candidate interviews since the beginning, and I think that they're a great idea, because I think that one of the biggest problems that we have in our election right now is the ability to get information out to voters and help them become informed voters. So I'll begin, hopefully better than I did at the last meeting, and I'll actually introduce myself. My name is Andrew Patceg, and I am running for City Council. I am a constitutional conservative Christian. I introduce myself in that exact same manner at virtually every door I go to. Sometimes it starts the conversation off a little bit sideways, because not everybody agrees with that. Sometimes they really agree with that and they just don't believe you. And I've had people tell me, everybody says that they're conservative. What makes you different? How can I believe you? And I'm going to explain to you some about that in a moment, but I wanted to introduce myself to you a little bit. I was born and raised in Wyoming, and I grew up most of my life in Casper, and I went to Kelly Walsh and graduated from Casper Community College, and then I went from there to South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, because I wanted to study engineering, and I went into civil engineering, and then the opportunity arose for me to stay on to get my master's degree, and I did not want to have to come back and do that, so I thought it would be a good idea to just keep the momentum going. So I stayed on and did that. It was pretty awesome. I got a master's in civil engineering with emphasis on water resources. I've always been really interested in dams and waterways, and even when I was a kid and the water was running down the gutter, I would go dam it up and then watch it fill, realize that breach of the dam was imminent, and create a little diversion river and just sit back and admire my work. And I got a lot of enjoyment out of that when I was a kid. And now I get paid to do it. So within 2 months' time, I graduated from college, got married, and moved, I think it was 1,600 miles away from anybody we knew, and that took my wife and I down to Atlanta, Georgia for a spell. And I'll tell you what, we were very blessed when we got to move back to Wyoming, and even more blessed when we got to move back to Sheridan. For me, could have gone either way, to Casper or Sheridan, but I was really praying hard for God to close all the wrong doors and just deadbolt them and keep the right one wide open. And so he brought us back to Sheridan, and I'll tell you, it's just been great. And one of the greatest things, of course, about Sheridan is the lack of wind relative to the rest of the state, which produces a lot of good things for us. I'm not sure what your policy is on wind energy, but I'm glad that our horizons are not dotted with the large predator bird killing windmills. I think that there's a significant discrepancy between how that kind of action is treated for certain types of energy versus others. I did work for several years with a company that the bread and butter was basically keeping the state and federal permits for coal mines greased and working, and everybody in good compliance. And so I learned a lot about the rules and regulations that coal mines have to follow in Wyoming, and it is very strict and very stringent. And one violation can put you on what they lovingly refer to as the naughty list. And the naughty list was very bad because it meant not only did your bond, which is kind of like your insurance, that if you go bankrupt or leave, somebody else will have enough money to fix the big hole that you dug. Your bond costs go up way up, and there's a lot of, and basically it stays there for years on end. So in other words, there are significant monetary repercussions for even killing one large predator bird. Yet we have dozens to hundreds that are killed every year because of the wind farms. And the same goes for bat populations. So anyway, I am pro-energy. I'm very pro-coal. I do not believe that carbon dioxide is a pollutant in the way that it has been presented. I believe that a 10% increase in carbon dioxide would produce a plant bloom on this earth unlike we've ever seen, just the same way that a 10% increase in oxygen would allow each and every one of us to feel like we could run to the other side of Sheridan and not even get winded. There's a lot of science that is getting disregarded on things, and for that matter, a lot of science and facts are being disregarded to support narratives that, well, frankly, I don't support. What do I support? I support limited government and increased personal freedom. So, as I mentioned earlier, when I go to the door and somebody says, I don't believe that you're really a conservative, or how can you prove it to me? I actually like that question, because what I get to do is I get to tell them a little bit about what I've already done, even as a citizen. I could just say, take my word for it, but that's been done to death, and we've seen how many times that taking somebody's word for it has not proven to be a very good way of doing it. Two incidents. The first one was when I first started paying attention to the city council, there was an ordinance that was brought forward to fix a loophole where if county animals came into the city and got caught, and then they got taken to the dog and cat shelter, the county residents were not held responsible for the cost of housing those animals while they were there. And they were working to fix that. Excuse me. And at the last moment, there was an amendment proposed that said, well, while we're dealing with animals, let's go ahead and put this in there too. And it was an amendment that would effectively make illegal the practice of declawing animals, not just cats, but also cats and dogs. That includes the dewclaw and dogs. Declawing animals within Sheridan city limits. Now, this perked my ears because I recognized that it was a big overreach of government power. Now, my pets at my house, they're like family. I treat them very well. And they always have warm places to sleep, and so I love my pets. But when it comes down to it, your pets are your personal property. And what making illegal a medical procedure such as declawing did was it affected how I and all the rest of you can manage our personal property right in our own living room. And so what I did was I started going around and asking the different veterinarians in town if they had any knowledge of this ordinance or had been spoken to by council or any council member about this prior to it being presented, and they all said no. All the ones that I talked to said that they didn't have any knowledge of this, and a couple of them were quite upset about it. Long story short, they came and they spoke to council. Council decided to remove that portion of the ordinance. The rest of the ordinance pushed through, which I didn't agree with all the rest of it, but removing that ban on decline was a huge step in protecting against government overreach on how we handle our personal property. So that's incident number one. The second was a lot more recent. House Bill 0002 passed at the state level that required all municipalities to deal with water rights on property that's being subdivided. I happen to be a civil engineer who has expertise in water rights, so this was very interesting to me. Well, I found out about this long before it came to the city because I also am in frequent conversation with our local Board of Control, which is an arm under the state engineer's office. So I knew this was coming. But when I saw the way that the city had presented the ordinance, I knew that what it represented, in my best estimate, the only thing I could call it was eminent domain. What it did was it said, if you're going to subdivide your property, then you first and foremost have to offer to sell the water rights on the subdivided portion to the city. Now the city can say, that's not going to be useful to us. You can retain it or abandon it, whatever you want to do with it. But the point is that the first option, the first decision was going to be made by the city. And now, as a person with some expertise in water rights, I understand that water rights are tied to the land. They are part of the value. They're part of what a person owns. It's their property. The person doesn't own the water. They own the right to use the water. It's the same way with wildlife. People don't own the wildlife. The state owns the wildlife, but we can get licenses to harvest wildlife. So I worked closely with a group of people, including the city attorney, Brendan Kearns, and I have to say, I think he did an exemplary job of listening to the input from the group, which was largely in favor of personal property rights and against eminent domain. And the final version of the ordinance that passed 2 weeks ago, I believe is right, it brought it from eminent domain and back down to putting the power in the landowner's hands. So personal property rights, again, a big win. So what I'm saying is that I've already had incidents where, as a citizen, I was able to have a positive effect for the citizens of our area in the form of personal property rights. And in that regard, I'd say that my claims to be a constitutional conservative hold true. My record already speaks for itself. So I'm sure that there's some introductory information that I've left out, but I've given you a few snippets of the different things that I talk to people about when I'm going door to door, which I've been doing for months now. Took a little break around the primary, but I'm back out there. And it's been great. It's been great to talk to people, and that's why I'm excited to be here tonight, because I'm excited to hear your questions, and I've got a few points that I can bring up and get some of your input too, if you like, and we can discuss those as well. So at this time, I'd like to open it up to questions. And hold on just a second, I'm gonna be having my notes.
Ricochet.
Okay.
Hang on just a minute.
You want me to wait? Okay. It's gonna be a multi-part question,
Okay.
so we'll see if you can hold your focus. Oh, I have to be,
Oh, okay, I was going to repeat the question, but that's even better.
Okay, here I am. So, I am wondering, and some of this you may or may not know, because I don't know how much you can get to know if you're not on the council. I mean, I know it's accessible, but probably difficult to fully get. How much of the budget, the expenses, the income, all of that, of the city of Sheridan is purely self-supported and maintained by this community versus state money, federal money? And with that idea, should something happen where we need to separate from certain funds or support, can the city maintain what it's already doing without outside money?
Okay, so the first question is what % of the budget do we take care of ourselves versus state or federal? And the second part is, can we, if we had to do it ourselves, could we? Is that a fair paraphrase?
Yeah.
Okay. As far as the percentage goes, I'm not exactly sure on that. I can tell you that we have 3 enterprise funds and they are designed to support themselves. And that we recently, I learned through attending every city council meeting for over a year now, I witnessed a presentation from a consultant in one of the eastern states that looked at the city's budget and found that we're actually in really good shape right now, which means that the rate of expenditures that come through the enterprise funds is roughly meeting the income that is brought through the associated fees. So an enterprise fund is like when you pay your water bill or you pay your sewer, your trash bill. There are certain fees that get assessed to the citizens, and then those fees go to fund the expenses for those funds. So what the consultant said is that we are in good shape and that we actually were capable of deferring rate hikes right now for as many as 2 years on most of the funds, 5 years on the water fund, and that meant that we were actually kind of breaking even. Now, the question that I have is, how much of that is because of money that is coming from SLID money, or I believe that's state loan investment. I can't remember the acronym exactly, but it's how much of it is coming from state loans. I'm not exactly sure. It might be at a point where it's nice and steady because the bigger projects are being funded through loans from the state. But the question of can we do it? Could we do it if we suddenly had to say no to state and federal money? My gut tells me that the federal money is a definite yes. I'm not 100% positive on that, but I can tell you that when it comes to bigger projects like the one that's going to be taking place I think it's going to start next spring, where they are tearing up Main Street. And just to be clear, the DOT is resurfacing Main Street. And if they're going to have the pavement off, that's when the city of Sheridan needs to get in there and take care of the pipes, redoing the pipes underneath, because we don't want to have to go back after the fact and cut into brand new pavement to do something like that. So we absolutely have to join the timing of those two things. And the budget that was approved this year included $5.2 million of additional debt for part of that project. Now, I'm very debt averse, thanks to my wife and Dave Ramsey, and I can tell you that I'm not comfortable with debt, but I understand that there are circumstances where we might have to take out a loan such as that. One of the more recent ones was the Northern Interstate Exchange. That one also involved a loan, and we are in the process of paying that back, and we're making progress on it. So to answer your question, I think that we could take a substantial cut in projects, or in money, but from the state loans and federal loans. But what we might also have to do in those cases, if we have a bigger project that needs to be done, we might just simply have to settle for the lesser of two options, which is, okay, they're gonna resurface a road, and we're just gonna have to wait and address the infrastructure at another time. I'm not sure exactly how that would play out, but what I'm saying is that bringing the attitude of, okay, maybe sometimes we have to deal with less in order to not put ourselves in financial harm's way, is the exact way that we have to manage our household budgets, and I feel like the city should also have to be making the same decisions at times.
So what would be, if you get elected, what do you think is one major thing that needs to be changed with the current council and how it's run and how ideas and stuff?
Okay, what's one major thing that needs to be changed with the council? I think that the biggest thing that needs to be changed, which is a matter of my opinion, is the presence and representation of conservative values on the different council, from the different council members. That's the entire reason I'm running, is because I feel like there's an imbalance on the council, and that if, as a conservative person who generally follows the I like to mind my own business and I'd appreciate if you mind yours philosophy, that doesn't necessarily lead a lot of people that feel that way into public service, because frankly it's self-refuting. You don't want to meddle in other people's business, so you just stay out of it. But what I've seen is that has produced in most levels of government, I'm sure that there are some exceptions out there, a predominance of people that seem to be addressing issues from some other paradigm other than a conservative one. Excuse me. So I would like to see a better balance of representation in as far as ideology is concerned. And then my hope would be that if that balance is achieved, that it will have a very positive effect, not only on the fiscal spending, but also on the types of ordinances that get brought forward and approved, again, in the respect of protecting people's personal property rights, and helping to steer Sheridan in a direction that's going to be, this is a matter of my opinion, but a better future for Sheridan, which means I would like not to see, I don't want to see Sheridan continue down a path that looks like it's going to lead to becoming a town where only the uber wealthy can live here. I think that there are things that we can do now to change the direction of the ship, but you don't turn the Titanic on a dime. So we have to start now, and we have to start implementing things that are going to be basically playing the long game of getting things back, pulling the government back into its own lane and keeping it on a limited basis so that we can maximize personal freedom and hopefully have a corresponding effect on house prices and development prices in the future, that will allow people like my children to be able to afford to live here, afford a house here. So, does that answer it?
Yes.
Okay, great. In the back.
In the back. Well, first, I want to correct something I said earlier before you started speaking, Andy. And that is, for those folks that are going to have a write-in campaign, 2 days after the election, they have to have their application filled out and submitted and pay the fees in order to have their votes counted.
After the general.
After the general, correct. So, with that being said, I wanted to make sure that correction got out there. On the ballot, there's two measures. One is the 2%, I think it's hotel, 2% hotel fee, and the other is the 1 cent or 1%. Is that GPET?
Yes.
Okay. So my understanding is they haven't done any research, that it's just something that they've always done, so therefore let's continue it. What are your thoughts about that? Should there be a formal review as to whether or not the city actually needs those funds? And if so, should it be more of a fair percentage as a requirement instead of just a status quo?
Okay. So, the percentage is 1%. And, I suppose there are some cases or some locations that might actually do a fraction of a percent on sales tax, but I'm not sure of any that do that. And your question is, I believe you asked, does the city rely on that? Is that what you asked?
No, it's my understanding that they don't do any research to see if the city actually needs those funds.
Oh, needs it, right, that's
I know
what-
that every other term, they have that 1% that comes due.
Uh-huh.
And then I just saw that it was 2% for hotels.
Okay, so, this is a basic tenet of conservatism that, I'm not fond of any tax. I understand that some taxes are necessary, and that the way our society works is that there are certain taxes that are going to be assessed and we're just gonna end up paying. The question that you asked is, does the city need that money? I can tell you unequivocally, yes, the city does need that money. Do I think it should need that money? No, I don't. I think that it's actually, it's one of the points that worries me about Sheridan, that we have become reliant upon the 1% sales tax to cover basic operational costs for the city. An optional task, or an optional tax is 58% of it goes toward expense categories other than projects. Only 42% goes to projects. Now, when people vote for it, they're voting for a variety of reasons, but one of the biggest, or most, I would say most common, or most widely known, is they think, well, we vote for this 1% sales tax because it gives us projects. And then around town, you'll occasionally see the 1 cent sales, little circular signs that tell you that this was paid for out of that. And I have to admit that that's a good marketing campaign. And I understand the merits on both sides of supporting it and rejecting it. But I also understand how easy it is for someone to propose something like this back in, I believe it started either in 1987 or 88, for a very important reason. And I believe what I heard was that we had a dam. As a water resource engineer, I should not have to speak so generically about this. We had a dam up on the mountain that needed to be raised because we needed additional capacity. Now, of course, that being a post-1950 construction project, it also meant that the additional water we stored was also a post-1950 water right, which makes it subject to the Montana call when the Yellowstone River Compact is called out. So that's just a little extra factoid there. But when it starts out for a good reason, and then it continues because maybe there were some other expenses that it would be good to take care of, and then it continues and it continues, it's very easy to get reliant upon those types of monies. And that's what really worries me, is that we have an optional 1 cent sales tax that we are now using to pay our normal bills. So we are relying on the city and the counties, the cities and the county, to continue to vote that forward. Otherwise, the figure that I heard at the council meeting where this was discussed is that the city of Sheridan would have to potentially take a 21% reduction in their annual budget if this tax does not get passed. Now, do I want to throw a stick of dynamite into the dam and just blow it up? I don't think that there's any wisdom in advocating for that. Do I want to see us wean ourselves off of and no longer rely on a tax to cover basic operating costs, which also includes the $400,000 that the city pays to the airport every year for their portion of sustaining that service in the community? I'd like to see us be able to pay our bills with the taxes that the normal taxes we have, and not have to pay for basic bills out of optional taxes. So I'm trying to think back if I answered your question there.
You did. Can I capitalize on that now?
Certainly, I think you better grab that microphone though to do it.
Okay. So, I agree that the city should learn to be more self-sufficient and not rely on, the state says 4% in sales tax, Sheridan opts for the 2%. So it's the GPAT one set
Okay,
every 2 years, I believe it comes due, something along those lines.
I think it might be every 4, but
Every
go
4
ahead.
years, okay. So with that intention, wouldn't it make sense that they should honor the state's constitution, and with the 52%, 58% that they're spending on other resources, on top of that, they have nonprofits and things like that they're also utilizing that monies for. They may not say directly, that's where the money's going, but obviously with that excess of funds, it's going to cover those expenses. And there's a vote coming up tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken, regarding the cat shelter. Now, I've got nothing against the cat shelter, but I do have a problem with spending taxpayers' money in neighborhood of $50,000, and then they want to continue to have this 1% sales tax. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Right, so, the Wyoming Constitution is very clear in Article 16, Section 6, Paragraph A1, that the government or the governmental agencies are not to be donating money to another organization except for in the necessary benefit of the poor. So that's in our Constitution. Just because something is stated in the Constitution doesn't mean that that's how things work, because we are people and people have ideas, and sometimes they forget that this thing over here says you shouldn't be doing that, and a lot of times it comes with good intentions. But the fact of the matter is the Constitution does speak against giving money to nonprofits, and except for in the necessary benefit of the poor. So when it comes to the Second Chance Cat Shelter, what I hear most people talking about is that they're in favor of additional funding for the shelter, as they talk about the service that the shelter provides. And some of the discussion that happened at the study session a week ago centered on the fees that are collected from people who come to the shelter, and whether or not those fees could be raised to help augment the additional costs that they see, as opposed to having to come back and ask for more money from the city. And the answer is that yes, some of those fees could be raised, but then I think that they said that they would be higher than the same service or option that was offered at the dog and cat shelter. Essentially what I'm saying is that they're already in a position where if they start to raise fees, then they're actually going to be kind of competing with the dog and cat shelter. Now, the way I understand it is the overflow from the dog and cat shelter is what comes, a lot of what comes to or some of what comes to the Second Chance Cat Shelter. So we need to think about, we have an issue. Are we addressing the symptom or are we addressing the cause? And one of the things that I am going to be looking into is because I heard that our dog and cat shelter is either adverse to or doesn't even do any more euthanasia. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I'm getting some nods that it doesn't do it. Okay, so part of the problem is in most cities where they have the ability to plan these things out, the dog and cat shelter is located across the road or in close proximity to the landfill for a very good reason, and that's because this is a necessary part of addressing the issue of animals in our community. Sometimes they have to be rounded up and sometimes they have to be euthanized so that we don't have an overrun, which can bring about a slew of other problems in our community. So if the Second Chance Cat Shelter is experiencing greater needs because the overflow from the dog and cat shelter is either too much or just the input from additional animals being dropped off from the community is getting too large, then I think we need to think about how we're addressing this problem. And if we're not addressing it in a way that makes sense for a city to have to address it, such as, if necessary, euthanizing animals, then that's something that we're gonna have to look at. I don't think that we should continue to violate the state constitution by giving more money to a nonprofit to address what I consider to be a symptom instead of a problem. And I did some of the math on this, and the last years, the donations that came through for nonprofits in Sheridan last year, if the Second Chance Cat Shelter got an additional $50,000, which they were originally given $30,000, that would put them at a total of $80,000, and that would put them in the second highest recipient of tax dollars of the entire list of 15 that got money last year. And additionally, the city administrator did point out the fact that if this additional money were approved, it would not correspond with a budgeted line item. In other words, the $50,000 would have to come out of the city of Sheridan's cash reserves. So just straight out of the cash reserves. Now, one of the things I generally try to bring things back to home budget, because that's where I've got experience, and my wife and I have for 16 years now been working on squeezing every penny until it screams, because that's what you got to do to make it in this world. And the correlation that I draw is that what we need to do is we need to keep things on a conservative level. We don't need to keep giving money out. If it's a non-budgeted item, then it might be something that we just have to simply do without. In our home budgets, if it's a non-budgeted item, like I'd love to have a really great generator. Those things are expensive. It's gonna have to wait, and we're gonna have to save, and so I feel like that it would be wise to help the Second Chance Cat Shelter find maybe a different source of funding, or help them get connected with maybe some grants or something out there that could help them meet this shortfall, and help them, give them the time that they need to reassess their expenses so that they can bring things into a more manageable condition for themselves moving forward. And I think that we need to consider that if we're not doing any euthanizing in town, that we might be creating part of the problem that we're trying to solve with taxpayer money right now.
Agreed. Thanks.
We probably have time for one more question, or if Andy wants to bring up a one.
Okay. I came with a list of some of the issues that people have told me while I was going door to door. One of which is, some of these are pretty simple, and some of them are a little bit bigger. City specs, city specifications. These are the basic rules of, if something's gonna be built, this is how it should be built. And one of the things that would be good is if every new house that's built has a double clean out, which means the sewer going out to the road has a clean out that you can clean out the pipe that goes out to the road, and then there's a double clean out at the same location that goes back into the house. That's a very small change that we could bring. We could propose that to the city engineering, and they'd probably say, that sounds like a good, solid idea. If we incorporate that, it's gonna have some positive effects for our city down the road. And this is why I like talking to people, is because I wouldn't have thought about that myself. It was brought to me, and I thought, this is a great idea. Let's see. There are, I guess on the same line, just as a point of information, you might not know this, but when you're responsible for your services, you're responsible all the way to the main out in the street. You're not responsible for starting at your property line. Now, I'm not sure what reason was the reasoning behind the city of Sheridan switching to that back when they did. But I know that there are other municipalities that don't. Your responsibility stops at your property line, and if something happens and the service line out in the street springs a leak, you're not suddenly on the hook for $10,000 or $20,000 of street repair to go along with the line repair. And that's something that I think that we should look into, whether or not, the reasoning, it makes sense to get away from that again and go back to the way I believe it was. But here's the big one.
Andy, can I tell you something about that?
Oh, sure.
I lived in that situation when we lived in town.
Mm-hmm.
And the person who bought the house after us was one person instead of a family of 5.
Okay.
And so he didn't have enough water coming through the line, and it froze when he was gone to work. The city, because of the way that is, that you have to take care of it all the way to the main,
Mm-hmm.
he couldn't fix it. It froze in winter, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't repair it until spring.
So we went all winter without water.
He went all winter without water, sewer stuff.
Wow.
He had to haul laundry, he had to haul in water. It was a nightmare. And it was because it was all on him, because he didn't have the resources to wait to heat up the ground, to cut into the road. He could afford to bore and to go through the pipes that he has and into the main that way, but to tear up the road and do all of that. And when he asked the city, what can I do, or what are my options, they're like, you'll just have to wait for the ground to thaw.
Okay.
So it would be helpful. It does, you've made the point.
Yeah.
We can't, homeowners cannot afford to tear up a road that's a city road
Mm-hmm.
to fix something that's not on their property but is affecting their property.
Right. So yeah, I agree that the property owner should not be responsible for services that extend beyond their property boundary. And again, I'm not sure exactly why they made that change, but I wanted to address housing real quick before we go on, because there's a very big issue that nobody is talking about. Now we've all heard the issues about taxes, but the city council is not going to fix your taxes. County commissioners aren't going to fix your taxes. That's something that has to be fixed by state representatives and senators, okay? And they need to go to the acquisition-based tax. And this whole, well, we don't have records going back to 1970 argument that I've seen from a certain individual in the newspaper is complete bunk. You don't have to go back to 1970 and figure out what it was sold for back then. You can simply say, 5 years ago, prior to the pandemic spike, we're gonna set home values at that. That's what you're gonna end up paying your taxes on from that point going forward. I'm not a senator or a representative, so I'm speaking something that I believe in, but something I don't have any room to affect right now. There are other communities in Wyoming that have a serious problem finding homes for their teachers, their fire department, police department, the people that stock the shelves at Walmart, all of the workforce, because there's no availability, or maybe it hasn't been built, or maybe the houses that are being built are going to be way out of the price range that our workforce can afford. That's one point that I've been talking about in several other talks, but today what I want to bring up is the VRBOs. Has anybody here heard anybody talk about VRBOs being a problem in the housing industry? Yeah, I didn't either until somebody brought it up, and they told me that at places like Du Bois, you have to have a license to have a VRBO the same way you have to have a license to have a liquor store. And the reason is because, okay, so VRBOs are where a person buys a property and then they rent it out to vacationers or other people for shortened periods of time, like 2 weeks, a month, I don't know, whatever people decide, they rent it out. So, but for what?
Short-term rentals.
Short-term rentals. So the problem is that House A could be housing a family in our town. Instead, it's bought and it's rented out, and therefore it's out of commission. It cannot be. It's being used as a rental instead of a home for somebody. Now, I'm not sure what the answer is to this. I don't like the thought of going to another level of licenses that the city has to dole out because, again, I heard that the city recently went to having to license snow removal people, and frankly, I think that every time that the city licenses something, it brings in layers of control that decrease personal freedom, and frankly, the government is not known for efficiency. So it can make things more expensive. Every licenses make things more expensive. However, if you have a little slice of heaven, like Sheridan is, then there's going to be a lot of people that want to come here. And if we're having problems with housing availability for our people because they're all being taken out of the equation for one reason or another, then we're going to have to start looking at some of those other things that are the cause and not just stare at the symptom. So it goes back to the same thing with the cat shelter. We need to look at the cause of the problem, not just try to throw money at the symptom. So that's all I'll say about that. Any other questions, or are we out of time? Yes, we are.
Anybody else? Anything else?
Okay, so I just want to say, I am a constitutional conservative Christian, and my motivation for getting into this whole thing is we have to step up. We have to step up. We have to shoulder the weight for whatever time we're called to do it, so that we can help keep Sheridan such an amazing place to live, and it really is. I love Sheridan. Frankly, I was really enjoying the fact that it was kind of this hidden little gem in Wyoming, and then it seems we got discovered. But either way, it's still a great town, and there are so many amazing people that live here and work here, and frankly, I'm pleased to call them friends, and some of them family, and I want it to remain this great place so that my family can be here. My kids can, if they want to choose to live here, they're not going to be kicked out just because of the cost of everything, which so many people's kids are having to leave and go to other cities right now because of that. And so I think that there are things that we can do right now that start to steer the ship back in a more sustainable direction long term. And what we need to do is we need to figure out which candidates are we voting for, which candidates are going to support that kind of change, and which candidates are just going to support more of the exploding growth and prices, and not that we're against growth and people earning more money or anything like that, but when we're looking at a sustainable future, things that grow fast can also die very fast. So we want to make sure that we're on a nice trajectory forward and that we're taking care of each other while we're also looking out for our future.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.